The morning air buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of students filled the grand hall of Almore University. Cameras were being set up, notepads opened, microphones tested. Today wasn't just another lecture, it was the most awaited seminar of the year. Religion through the lens of reason. The speaker? None other than Mr. Vincent Gray, a world-renowned atheist philosopher, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and infamous for his cold critique of religion, particularly Islam. As the spotlight hit the stage, Vincent stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of every soul in the room. Holding the microphone with the ease of a seasoned performer, he began in a loud, calculated voice. If God exists, then why is the world drowning in pain and suffering? Why do innocent people die? Why do children starve? Why are there wars in His name? Laughter and applause erupted. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Professors smiled. Students nodded vigorously and jotted down his words, as if he had just dropped an undeniable truth. Vincent continued, walking across the stage with slow confidence. And Islam, your so-called religion of peace, why does it have such a violent history? Why are its believers stuck in the past, following the words of a man who lived 1,400 years ago? The laughter grew louder. Vincent smirked. Muhammad was just a man. He claimed divine revelation, but where are the witnesses? The Qur'an? Just recycled myths dressed up as scripture. The words cut deep. Silence followed for a split second, then claps resumed, louder than before. But no one expected what would happen next. From the back of the hall, a faint sound broke through the applause, small footsteps. Light, hesitant, but purposeful. The crowd turned to see a small figure emerging, a boy, no older than 7, wearing a clean white kurta, a small prayer cap, and a tiny backpack. In his hand, he held a pocket-sized Qur'an, wrapped gently in cloth. The room fell into an eerie silence as the boy approached the stage. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. Is this a prank? Whose kid is this? What's going on? The boy's steps were calm. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. Slowly, he climbed the steps to the stage, his small hands gripping the banister. He walked to Vincent, barely reaching his waist. Then, in a clear, gentle voice, he said, My name is Fari. I'm 7 years old. And I would like to ask you a question, Mr. Vincent. A chuckle rose from one corner of the hall. Some students giggled. Vincent raised an eyebrow, smirking. You, he scoffed. A child? What do you know about theology, boy? Or are you expecting angels to come down and help you debate me? The hall laughed again. But Fari remained unfazed. He stepped closer to Vincent, looked straight into his eyes, and asked, If God doesn't exist, then who created your brain that thinks He doesn't exist? The question pierced the air like a needle. Vincent blinked. The hall fell silent. Fari didn't stop. And if everything in life is just a coincidence, then how are you wearing shoes that fit, clothes stitched to your size, and speaking into a microphone that works exactly as expected? Coincidences don't create perfection, sir. Vincent's face tightened slightly. The professors leaned forward. Students exchanged glances. Some reached for their pens again. What was happening? Fari stood tall, at least as tall as a 7-year-old could. His voice was soft, but every word hit with the force of unfiltered truth. Sir, he continued, you said humans are just evolved animals. Then can evolution explain why humans feel shame? Why do we cry when we sin? Why do we seek forgiveness? Animals don't do that. Rocks don't do that. Water doesn't feel guilt. But we do. The silence grew heavy. Vincent crossed his arms. Humans feel shame, he replied, because they've developed higher awareness. That's evolution. Fari nodded politely. But sir, awareness is not something you can see or touch. It's not an object. It has no weight, no color, no shape. So by your logic, If something can't be seen, it isn't real? Vincent hesitated. Fari pressed further. Then your love for your mother, is that real? You can't photograph it. You can't weigh it. But you believe it exists, don't you? A wave of soft gasps filled the hall. Vincent looked down. Students stopped writing and simply stared. So why reject God? Fari asked gently. Just because you can't see him? Your mind, your logic, you can't see those either. But you trust them. Vincent's mouth opened, but no words came. It was as if this child wasn't just speaking, but gently unraveling layers of intellectual pride with pure, unshakable innocence. And then Vincent tried to reclaim control. Fine, he said, forcing a laugh. Let me ask you, boy. If the Qur'an is truly divine, why is it full of stories? Why not facts? Why fairy tales? Fari carefully unwrapped the Qur'an in his hand. He flipped through its thin pages until he found the verse he wanted. Then, with calm reverence, he read, We relate to you, O Muhammad, the best of stories in what we have revealed, as a reminder for those who reflect. Surah Yusuf, Ayah 111. He closed the book and looked up. Sir, don't you learn from history? Didn't you study past wars, past empires, past mistakes, so we don't repeat them? Vincent blinked again. Of course, he said stiffly. That's why Allah tells us stories, Fari said softly. So that we don't become like Pharaoh, arrogant and blind to truth until it's too late. The hall was utterly still now. No one moved. Vincent stood frozen, looking at the boy, not like an opponent, but like a mirror. A mirror he had avoided all his life. You're clever, boy, he muttered. But religion is still full of rules. Chains. Isn't it a prison for the human mind? Fari smiled innocently. Sir, do you feel trapped when the traffic light turns red? Vincent frowned. That's different. That's for safety. Exactly. Fari nodded. Islamic laws are like traffic lights. Not to restrict you, but to protect you from hurting yourself and others. They are not cages. They are fences around the cliff's edge. Vincent was quiet. His hand instinctively touched his chin, as if brushing off invisible dust, dust not from the world, but from years of doubt clouding his heart. Fari stepped closer to the mic again. I may only be a child. I haven't memorized much. But I know that truth doesn't need age. And the Qur'an is not a tale, it's a light. Even if no one speaks it, it still shines in the hearts of those who seek it. A single clap echoed from the back row. Then another. And another. Suddenly, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding. Not out of entertainment, not because of spectacle. But because in the innocence of a child, they had found something terrifyingly beautiful, undeniable truth. Vincent stood frozen. A professor. A thinker. A lifelong skeptic. And yet, he was the one being taught. By a 7-year-old boy. The thunderous applause had barely faded when Mr. Vincent cleared his throat and tried to reassert control over the conversation. Though his voice remained steady, there was a slight tremble, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who prided himself on intellectual dominance. You're quick with words, Fari, he said, forcing a crooked smile. But let's test your faith a little deeper. Fari looked up at him, eyes calm and ready. How can you believe in a book that was written 1,400 years ago? Vincent asked. How can it still be relevant today? The world has changed. Science has changed. People have changed. Fari raised his small hand, asking permission to speak, and then responded gently. Sir, may I ask you just one question? Vincent gave a nod, part curiosity, part challenge. If someone wrote a manual for a machine, and it turns out that the manual works perfectly for every version of that machine, from the earliest model to the latest, wouldn't that mean the manual was written by the creator of the machine? The hall went silent again. The analogy hit home. The Qur'an, Fari continued, is the manual for the human being. And humans haven't changed in their core. We still love, hate, get angry, lie, forgive. That's why its guidance is timeless, because the one who created us also sent the book. Vincent stood still, his fingers twitching over the mic. He was searching for a response, but the simplicity of the logic left little room to argue. He shifted tactics. Even if I accept that, he said slowly, what about the harsh verses? Like the punishment of cutting off a thief's hand? That's inhumane, isn't it? Fari nodded thoughtfully, then asked, Sir, may I ask, which is more inhumane? Cutting off the hand of a repeat thief, or allowing thousands of innocent people to keep losing their property because the system is too weak to stop crime? That question was not rhetorical. It demanded reflection. Fari continued, his voice now softer, but filled with quiet strength. You see, sir, Islam's laws are not meant to torture. They are like vaccines. Yes, they might sting for a moment, but they protect the whole community from greater harm. A few students in the front row nodded, including a criminal law professor who had previously dismissed religious jurisprudence. Now, even he scribbled something into his notebook. Vincent's expression darkened slightly. The room was slipping away from him, and he knew it. Still, he pressed on. If the Qur'an is perfect, why didn't God just make everyone believe in it from the beginning? Why all this drama? Why give people a choice if he wants them to follow him? Fari smiled kindly. Because, sir, a test without choices isn't a test. This life is like a school. If every student automatically gets a perfect score, then what's the point of attending classes at all? He paused and then added, God gave us the gift of reason. He wants us to use it, to choose Him willingly, not under force. That's what makes belief valuable. Vincent sighed, leaning against the podium. He was growing tired, not physically, but spiritually. He had expected to crush blind faith with cold reason. But what he found instead was faith that was reason, wrapped in the voice of a boy. He tried again. Why Muhammad? He asked. Why did God choose a man from the deserts of Arabia? Why not someone from China or Rome, places of philosophy and progress? Fari didn't flinch. Because, sir, he said, Arabia was barren, poor, politically insignificant. And that's exactly why Allah chose it, so no one could say Islam came from power or wealth. It came from revelation, pure and uncorrupted. Vincent raised an eyebrow, slightly impressed. And why do you Muslims claim Muhammad was the final prophet? Who's to say there won't be more prophets or new books in the future? Fari carefully opened his small Qur'an again. His little fingers traced the pages until he stopped. Allah says in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 40, Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, but he is the messenger of Allah and the seal of the prophets. He looked up. If God says there are no more prophets after him, then that's the truth we follow. Vincent was clearly struggling now. But he wasn't ready to surrender. But that's just one book making a claim about itself, he challenged. Other books have also made claims. What makes yours special? Fari nodded as if expecting that. Yes, sir. But most other books have changed over time. Their followers disagree on versions, interpretations, even missing verses. But the Qur'an? It has remained the same, word for word, letter for letter, since it was revealed. Millions of people have memorized it, entirely. From 7-year-old boys to 70-year-old scholars. He looked around the room and said softly, If that's not a miracle, what is? Vincent's hands fell to his sides. His posture, once confident and towering, now seemed human, fragile, shaken. He whispered into the microphone, more to himself than to the room. Why is it that I've studied philosophy for decades, debated hundreds of people, and yet today I feel defeated by a child? Fari took a gentle step forward and said something that would echo in the minds of all who were present. Maybe because I didn't rely on my knowledge, sir. I only relied on the truth. And truth doesn't need to be old or young. It just is. From the crowd, a bold voice suddenly rang out. Fari! How can you be sure Islam is the best religion? Fari turned to the student who had spoken. His reply was simple and sincere. Because only Islam teaches submission to God without intermediaries. It teaches mercy to all living beings, and it unites knowledge with faith. And most importantly, there is not a single verse in the Qur'an that contradicts reason. The hall stirred. Murmurs of agreement spread like ripples. Vincent stood there, eyes lowered, his fingers lightly tapping the podium. He finally looked up and spoke. This time, his voice was hoarse. I used to think children only play games. But today, I feel like I've been taught by a small teacher. Fari smiled. I'm not the teacher, sir. But maybe Allah is trying to reach you, through me. And for the first time in years, Mr. Vincent, philosopher, skeptic, intellectual giant, had no reply. The room held its breath. It was no longer a debate. It was a door, creaking open. The hall that once echoed with laughter and confidence now sat in a stunned, reverent silence. Even the walls, once witnesses to countless debates and lectures, seemed to be listening with renewed curiosity. Mr. Vincent stood still, as if frozen between two worlds, his old convictions, and a rising tide of doubt washing them away. He finally broke the silence. You've shaken something in me, Fari. But let me be honest, this isn't over. I still have questions. Fari nodded politely. I'm here to answer them, sir. If you seek truth, I will do my best. But if it's only to win, I'm not the right opponent. The line drew a few chuckles from the students, but not mockery. It was admiration. A child calmly holding his ground in the face of a renowned philosopher. No arrogance. No fear. Just sincerity. Vincent took a deep breath. All right, let's talk about something deeper. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, then why does He allow natural disasters? Earthquakes? Famines? Why do innocent babies die? Gasps whispered across the room. It was the kind of question that made believers pause and doubters cheer. But Fari didn't flinch. He looked directly at Vincent, then at the audience, and replied with the weight of centuries behind his small voice. Sir, if this world were perfect, no pain, no sadness, no trials, then what would be the point of heaven or hell? He walked slowly to the front of the stage. This world is not paradise. It's a test. And in a test, there are moments of difficulty, of grief, of struggle. Not because God is cruel, but because through hardship, our hearts are refined. The audience leaned in. And as for the babies who die, Islam teaches that they go straight to paradise. Without judgment. Without suffering. He paused, his eyes welling slightly with emotion. Isn't that the purest form of mercy? To be granted eternal peace without being tested at all? Vincent stared at him. Something flickered in his eyes, a tear, perhaps, but he blinked it away. That's a beautiful way to look at it, he whispered. Still, he pushed forward. But what about the people who use Islam for violence? The terrorists. The extremists. They claim to follow your Qur'an. How do you explain that? Fari didn't hesitate. Sir, a knife can cut bread, or take a life. Is the knife to blame, or the hand that wields it? The hall rumbled with quiet nods. The analogy was sharp and undeniable. Islam is a teaching of peace, Fari continued. But not the one you see in headlines. The real Islam is the one read and lived by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Not the one distorted by anger, politics, or hate. Vincent opened his mouth to challenge again. But there are verses in the Qur'an about war. Fari interrupted gently, but firmly. Yes. But every verse is contextual. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 190, Allah says, Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress. For indeed Allah does not like transgressors. He let the words settle in the room before adding, Islam only permits defense. Never oppression. Never blind violence. Never injustice. For the first time, Vincent did not have a comeback. But he tried to shift again. All right, what about polygamy? Why does Islam allow a man to marry more than one woman? Isn't that unfair? Fari smiled lightly. Polygamy is not a command. It's a permission. And only under strict conditions. He walked slowly across the stage, addressing the entire hall now. Imagine a woman widowed after war, with children to care for. If a good man can protect her and provide justice between wives, then Islam allows that option. But it demands fairness. And fairness, sir, is almost impossible. That's why most Muslims today choose monogamy. Vincent nodded slowly. His challenges were beginning to dissolve, not because he had no more arguments, but because Fari's responses weren't attacks. They were answers. Gentle yet firm. Logical yet heartfelt. Where did you learn all of this? Vincent asked, his voice now genuinely curious. Fari looked down for a moment. From my father. From my Qur'an teacher. But mostly, from believing that what's true doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be clear. Vincent let out a dry laugh, half bitter, half awed. A calm heart, he muttered. I haven't felt that in years. Then Fari stepped forward, his voice softer now. Sir, God doesn't hate people who doubt. He hates arrogance. Doubt means your heart is searching. And if your heart is searching, that means God still loves you. There was a tremble in Vincent's hands now. His breath shallow. The audience felt it. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a soul being stripped of its pride. Can God forgive someone like me? Vincent asked. I've mocked him. In front of students. I cursed his name. I insulted his book. Fari's reply was immediate. Even Pharaoh, who claimed to be God, was given a chance. Allah sent Moses to him, not once, but again and again. So yes, sir. You can be forgiven. As long as your heart is not sealed. Vincent lowered his head. His hands covered his face. The weight of decades pressed against him, and finally began to crack. From somewhere in the back, a respected lecturer rose to his feet. Mr. Vincent, he said with a voice trembling with emotion, maybe this isn't about losing a debate. Maybe today you've begun to win over yourself. Vincent looked up at the ceiling. A tear rolled down his cheek. If this is what Islam really is, why have I never seen it like this before? Fari walked to his side and said, maybe because your heart was closed. But today, maybe. God is knocking. Not through fire. Not through fear. But through a whisper, in a child's voice. One by one, the audience began to stand. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply stared, stunned. The atmosphere was no longer academic, it was sacred. Vincent looked at Fari, then at the crowd, and then at himself. And in that moment, something broke free. Pride? Ego? Certainty? Whatever it was, it left behind silence. He whispered again. I need time. Fari nodded gently. Islam doesn't force, sir. But if you ever want to talk again, my father and I are always at the mosque. It's a peaceful place. And with that, the boy turned and walked off the stage. But he didn't walk away from a debate. He walked away having touched a soul. Days passed since the extraordinary debate at Ummah University, but its echo refused to fade. It had gone far beyond the campus, shared on social media, discussed in forums, whispered in academic circles. A viral video titled, "A 7-year-old silences a senior atheist philosopher," had already crossed 1 million views. But while the world debated online, the man at the center of it all, Mr. Vincent Gray, was lost in an internal battle he had never prepared for. He sat alone in his dimly lit study, surrounded by towering shelves of philosophical books. The writings of Nietzsche, Sartre, Hume, and Dawkins stared at him from the spines of dusty covers. But they brought no comfort now. His eyes were fixed on something very different, a small, green-covered Qur'an. It had been a parting gift from Fari. The boy had said nothing when handing it to him, just smiled and whispered, "This is light. If your heart wants to open, it will find you." For hours, Vincent stared at it. Not out of disdain, but out of fear. Fear of what might happen, if he opened it. He hadn't touched a religious book in years. To him, all scriptures were myth and manipulation. But this one felt different. Heavy, even in its small size. As if it carried not just ink and paper, but a weight from the sky. Finally, as the night deepened, he placed a hand on the book and whispered to the empty room. "All right. If you're there, show me." He opened to a random page. His eyes landed on a verse from Surah An-Nisa, verse 82. "Do they not reflect upon the Qur'an? If it had been from anyone other than Allah, they would have found many contradictions in it." He froze. The words felt like an arrow, shot directly into his intellect. He read it again. And again. Do they not reflect? Was that not what he had spent his entire life doing, reflecting, analyzing, dissecting? If it were from anyone other than Allah. A strange sensation rippled through his chest. Not fear. Not belief. Something in between, an awakening. He whispered to himself, trembling. "Why does this feel like it's speaking directly to me?" He closed the book, then reopened it again, deliberately this time. This time, he turned to the beginning. But before he could begin, a memory rushed back. That small voice. That calm, innocent face. Fari. "Sir, what matters is not how much you know, but how sincerely you want to search." The words echoed like thunder in a quiet cave. Vincent closed his eyes and leaned back. "I've been searching all my life," he whispered. "But maybe I've been searching in the wrong direction." The next morning, just as the call to Far dawn prayer echoed faintly across his neighborhood, Vincent found himself standing outside a small mosque. He wasn't dressed for prayer. He wasn't even sure why he was there. But his feet had led him, almost on their own. He stood at the gate, watching people walk in peacefully. No one questioned him. No one stared. He stood frozen, unsure if he belonged. Then, he saw him. That familiar small figure. Fari. The boy looked up, recognized him instantly, and waved with the same warmth as before. He walked up to Vincent and smiled. "Sir, you came." Vincent nodded stiffly. "I don't even know where to start." Fari motioned for him to come inside. "You don't need to start with words. Just come sit. My father is inside." Inside the mosque, Fari's father sat by a pillar, reading quietly. When he saw Vincent, he stood and welcomed him with grace and dignity, without judgment. They sat on the carpet, forming a small triangle of reflection. There was no debate now. No lecture. Just gentle conversation between a restless soul and two calm believers. "I don't understand Arabic," Vincent said honestly. Fari smiled. "That's okay, sir. God understands the language of the heart." Vincent chuckled softly. "You really are something, kid." Fari shrugged. "I just repeat what I learn. But truth doesn't need fancy words. It just needs a clean heart." Vincent took the Qur'an out of his coat and showed it to them. "Last night, I read this verse. It felt like it was accusing me." He read it aloud again. Fari's father listened, then said, "It's not an accusation. It's an invitation. The Qur'an is like a mirror. It doesn't insult you. It just shows you who you really are." Vincent nodded, tears forming again. "I've mocked believers for years. challenged every idea of God. How can He ever forgive me? Fari's father looked at him and said, Allah is not like us. He doesn't hold grudges. As long as your heart hasn't turned to stone, He is waiting. Vincent lowered his head. Maybe. I don't need all the answers right now. Maybe. I just want peace. Fari replied softly. Peace comes when the heart is clean. And sir, I see that your heart is being cleansed now. Vincent looked up slowly, his face pale but relaxed. Why do I feel so light, for the first time in years? Fari's father placed a hand on his shoulder. Because a heart that turns back to its creator always feels lighter. That day, Vincent didn't take the Shahida. But he stayed for the entire prayer. He stood quietly in the last row, mimicking the movements of the congregation. His hands raised, then bowed, then prostrated. His eyes remained wet the whole time. And after the prayer ended, he embraced Fari and his father, whispering, I want to come back to God. But I want to learn first. Fari nodded quickly. Learning is worship too, sir. I'll help however I can. Later that week, a stunning announcement shook Elmore University again. Vincent had called for an open forum, inviting all students and lecturers. Yes, the very same crowd that once applauded his mockery of faith. But this time, he walked onto the podium with a trembling voice and moist eyes. I didn't come today to debate, he said into the microphone. I came to apologize. A wave of silence spread across the room. All this time, I'd been at war with something I never truly tried to understand. But a small boy taught me something I couldn't learn in 50 years of philosophy. Logic without heart is arrogance. And a heart without faith is empty. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. He looked down at Fari, who sat silently in the front row. Today, I want to tell you all. I've decided to embrace Islam. The hall erupted. Cries of Allahu Akbar rang through the air. Students stood, some in tears. Others hugged one another. And then, Vincent said one final thing that would be quoted forever. If a 7-year-old boy can melt the heart of a stubborn atheist, then maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the boy speaking at all. Maybe it was God. Fari just smiled. Because he knew, it was never about winning a debate. It was about truth, finding a way in. The day Mr. Vincent Gray stood before hundreds at Elmore University and declared his intention to embrace Islam was the day a storm settled and a sunrise began. It was as if the cold walls of academia had witnessed something warmer than reason, humility. The students who once applauded Vincent for dismantling belief now sat in awe of a man who had dismantled his own ego. The professors who once nodded at his arguments now looked at him with softened eyes, as if meeting a new man. And at the front of it all sat Fari, hands folded, smiling quietly, content, not proud. Because he knew this wasn't his victory. It was the victory of truth. Vincent stepped down from the podium that day and was instantly swarmed by people, students, reporters, even critics, some congratulating, others simply speechless. But he didn't stay long. He quietly walked to the hallway, where Fari was waiting. The boy greeted him with a warm, Assalamu alaikum, though Vincent had not yet officially said the Shahida. You've already said it in your heart, Fari whispered. The rest will follow in its time. Vincent laughed softly. You always know what to say. They walked together outside the auditorium, the sky clear, the breeze gentle. For a man who had spent years denying God, the air felt different now. It no longer felt like the world was random. It felt intentional. Guided. Fari, Vincent asked as they sat on a bench beneath a large tree. What is it about Islam that makes it so complete? Fari looked up at the leaves swaying above them. Because it connects everything, sir. Your mind, your heart, your actions, your purpose. It brings them all back to one center, Allah. Vincent nodded slowly. But how do you stay consistent? How do you keep your faith from becoming routine? Fari smiled. By remembering that Islam isn't just about belief. It's about action. Prayer, charity, truthfulness, mercy, discipline. It's not just something you know. It's something you live. Vincent sat back and closed his eyes. I used to wake up every morning with anxiety, he murmured. The burden of knowing everything but feeling nothing. Now, even with so many unanswered questions, I feel peace. Fari replied without looking at him. Because Islam doesn't need you to know everything before you begin. It just needs you to trust and walk forward. That night, Vincent sat again in his study, staring at the same bookshelf. But this time, instead of pulling down another philosopher's work, he opened the Qur'an. This time, not to argue, not to analyze, but to understand. He began reading Surah Al-Fatiha. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Every verse felt like a breath of air in a room that had been suffocating for years. He didn't read quickly. He read like a man learning to walk again. And then he came across Surah Az-Zumar, verse 53. Say, O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, Allah forgives all sins. He set the book down and wept. All his arrogance. All his mockery. All his denial. Still, he was being offered mercy. The next morning, he called Fari's father. I'm ready, he said, his voice trembling. I want to become a Muslim. And so, in a quiet mosque filled with only a few witnesses, Vincent Gray said words that would forever reshape the trajectory of his soul. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Tears streamed down his face as Fari hugged him tightly. Welcome, brother, the boy whispered. I never thought the one guiding me to God would be a child, Vincent said. Fari laughed. I didn't guide you. Allah did. I was just a mirror. Weeks passed. Vincent changed, not just in name, but in manner. His voice softened. His steps became lighter. He returned to campus, not as the titan of atheism, but as a humble student of faith. Some mocked him. Others questioned his sincerity. But Vincent bore it all with the quiet strength of someone who had found what he had been missing all his life. He began spending time at the mosque, learning from Fari's father, attending small classes on Quranic tafsir, Islamic history, and Arabic. Every verse opened new windows in his heart. Every prayer polished the mirror of his soul. His former colleagues observed from a distance. Some thought it was a phase. Others felt threatened by his transformation. But none could deny one thing. Vincent Gray, once the symbol of secular intellect, now radiated peace. One afternoon, a group of students approached him on campus. Sir, one asked nervously, do you regret it? Leaving everything behind? Vincent smiled. No. I didn't leave anything behind. I left emptiness. And I gained purpose. Another student, curious but skeptical, asked, do you believe all the stories now? Adam and Eve, Noah, Moses, the miracles? Vincent replied, belief doesn't mean abandoning reason. Islam invites us to reflect. But now, I realize, not everything has to be proven to be real. Some things are known through the heart. He paused and added, I used to think truth came from being the loudest. Now I know, it comes from being the most sincere. A month later, Vincent organized a lecture at the same university hall, this time, not to challenge faith, but to share his journey. The poster simply read, From Arrogance to Awakening, a conversation with Brother Vincent. Students filled the seats again, just like before. But this time, there was no stage, no spotlight. Vincent sat at the edge of the platform, legs folded, Qur'an in his lap. He told them everything, not to convince but to confess. I ridiculed what I never tried to understand. I fought what I never truly studied. But God, in His mercy, didn't send me fire or thunder. He sent me a boy. A boy who asked questions I couldn't answer. Fari didn't overpower me. He reminded me. That truth doesn't shout, it whispers. And when your heart is ready, even a whisper can sound like thunder. In the back row, Fari sat beside his father, eyes wet, lips moving in dhikr. When the session ended, several students approached Vincent privately, some curious, some shaken, some ready to begin their own search. In the final scene of that chapter in his life, Vincent wrote a letter. A short one. He placed it inside the Qur'an Fari had gifted him and handed it back to the boy one day after prayer. Fari opened it. It read, "To the boy who shattered my walls with mercy. Thank you for letting God speak through you. Your name is Fari. But to me, you'll always be my first ayah." Fari folded the note gently and whispered, "Alhamdulillah." And that's how the greatest transformation at Elmore University didn't happen in a classroom. It happened in a child's honesty, a professor's surrender, and a conversation that proved you don't have to be old to speak the truth. You just have to be sincere. The seasons began to change. Trees that once whispered the sound of debate now rustled in quiet admiration. Elmore University, known for its scholarly rigor and philosophical coldness, was experiencing something unexpected: warmth. And at the center of this warmth were two unlikely companions. A boy of 7. And a former atheist professor of 63. Fari and brother Vincent. Their bond became legendary, not because they were loud, but because they were consistent. Every week, Fari and his father would meet Vincent at the mosque. They didn't come to impress or convert. They came to learn, share, reflect. And slowly, others joined. It began with one philosophy student who had been deeply moved by Vincent's public confession. Then came a female sociology professor, who said quietly, "If this man, who taught us to doubt, can find peace in belief, maybe I've misunderstood what faith really is." The mosque, once just a quiet corner near the university, started to fill with unfamiliar faces. People didn't come for rituals. They came for relief. One afternoon, after Asr prayer, Vincent sat across from Fari under the shade of a courtyard tree. "You know, Fari," he said with a chuckle, "I used to believe that children were meant to be taught, not followed." Fari sipped from his water bottle and replied, smiling, "And I used to believe grown-ups always knew everything." Vincent laughed, a genuine sound that had grown rare in his years of intellectual warfare. "When I first met you, I thought I would crush you with reason. But you disarmed me with sincerity." "Sincerity is harder to argue with," Fari replied. "Because it's not trying to win. It's trying to be honest." Vincent's smile faded to a thoughtful expression. "I spent so long building arguments. I forgot how to feel. Even when I debated believers, I wasn't really seeking answers. I was defending my pride." "What changed you?" Fari asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Vincent looked at the Qur'an in his lap. "It wasn't just your answers. It was your peace. I didn't understand how someone so young could be so grounded. And then I realized, it's because you never separated your heart from your mind." He paused. "I did. For decades." Soon after, local media picked up the story. Atheist professor converts to Islam after debate with child. Made headlines across online platforms. Interviews were requested. News anchors reached out. Vincent declined them all. Let the noise die. What matters now is quiet. But the impact was far from quiet. Messages began pouring in, emails from students in Germany, letters from seekers in Kenya, DMs from young people in France and Canada. One message read, "Brother Vincent, I'm an atheist too. But after watching your journey, I've started reading the Qur'an for the first time in my life. Thank you for being honest about your change." Another read, "I never took Islam seriously before. But that boy, Fari, he reminded me of something I lost as a child. I want to find it again." Vincent showed the messages to Fari. See what Allah does, he said. You whispered. And the world heard. Fari just smiled. Truth travels on wings we cannot see. But not everyone celebrated. Some university colleagues accused Vincent of losing intellectual credibility. Others said he had given up critical thinking in exchange for blind belief. One even wrote a public blog post. How a respected academic fell for a child's emotional rhetoric. Vincent read it silently, closed his laptop, and said to Fari, They still don't understand. They think belief means shutting your mind. Fari responded, That's because they've only met people who believe without thinking. But Islam asks us to think, with humility. He quoted, Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, are signs for those who reflect. Surah Al-Imran, verse 190. Vincent nodded. For most of my life, I worshipped the brain. Now I worship the one who gave me the brain. One day, a group of university debaters visited Vincent privately. They were preparing for an international event, and they asked him bluntly, Sir, what's the strongest argument for the existence of God? Vincent thought for a long moment, then pointed at Fari, who happened to be sitting nearby, reading quietly. Him. The students were confused. He's not a philosopher. He's a kid, Vincent replied. Exactly. That's the point. A child with pure logic and a clean heart crushed years of my arrogance. It's not about who says the words. It's about whether the words carry truth. The students were silent. If your goal is to win arguments, he added, then keep reading your books. But if your goal is to find truth, start cleaning your heart. Weeks later, Vincent stood again in front of the same debate stage. This time, not for conversion, not for applause, but for teaching. His lecture was titled, The Humility of Knowledge, Why We Must Listen to the Small Voices. He began with no notes, no slides, just a heart overflowing with clarity. I once mocked religion in this hall. I called it primitive, outdated, and irrational. But I've learned something. Knowledge without humility becomes poison. It blinds us. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked out over the crowd. I debated to be right. But that boy, he spoke to be real. He paused. Don't fear belief. Fear arrogance. Don't fear questioning. Fear ignoring the answers. That evening, as the sun set and the mosque lights flickered on, Vincent sat in the prayer hall, quietly reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas. Say, He is Allah one. Allah, the eternal refuge. He neither begets nor is born. And there is none comparable to him. Each verse now tasted different, like food he had once mocked but now craved. Fari entered and sat beside him. You read it beautifully, sir. Vincent smiled. I used to think Arabic was a dead language. But now, every word feels alive. Fari leaned back on his elbows and looked at the ceiling. That's because the Qur'an isn't just a book. It's a conversation between heaven and earth. Vincent closed the mushaf gently. And I'm just grateful that I finally decided to listen. News of Vincent Gray's transformation spread far beyond Elmore University. What began as a private debate between a little Muslim boy and a staunch atheist had now become a global conversation. In universities across Europe, interfaith panels began referencing the Elmore Awakening. Students in South Africa organized a symposium titled Logic, Faith, and the Voice of Innocence. Meanwhile, Islamic centers in the United States began using clips of the debate in youth seminars. But Fari and Vincent? They didn't seek the spotlight. They stayed grounded in the simplicity of prayer, study, and quiet service. One evening, as Vincent helped distribute food to the homeless outside a local shelter, a young man approached him cautiously. Sir, are you the professor who became Muslim because of a kid? Vincent smiled warmly, handing him a paper plate of food. I'm the man who found God, through a question I couldn't answer. The young man looked down. I used to believe in God when I was a boy. But life changed that. Vincent placed a hand on his shoulder. Then maybe it's time to listen to the boy again. That night, Vincent sat beside Fari on the mosque steps, looking at the crescent moon rising in the sky. Do you know what's strange? Vincent said. Fari glanced up. Everything? Vincent chuckled. No. What's strange is that I spent my whole life trying to change the world through arguments. But you changed people just by being sincere. Fari nodded slowly. Because arguments touch the mind, sir. But sincerity reaches the heart. And once the heart is moved, Vincent added, the mind has no choice but to follow. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rustling of the trees. Fari, Vincent asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Fari thought for a moment. Someone who helps people find Allah. Just like you helped me? Fari shook his head. I didn't help you, sir. You were already looking. Allah just allowed me to be there at the right moment. Vincent looked up at the moon again. Subhanallah, even the moon doesn't shine by itself. It reflects light from the sun. Maybe you're my little moon. The weeks turned into months. Vincent began teaching again, but with a twist. He no longer taught atheistic philosophy. Instead, he introduced a new course. Faith and Reason, an Integrated Perspective. In his first lecture, he opened with a verse from the Qur'an. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the night and day, are signs for people of understanding. Surah Al-Imran 190. Then he turned to his students. For years I ignored these signs. I thought intellect was enough. But intellect without guidance is like a compass without a map. You may move, but never arrive. A hand shot up. Sir, are you saying logic led you to Islam? Vincent nodded. Logic brought me to the door. But humility allowed me to knock. The class was silent. He continued. When I first debated Fari, I saw a child with simple questions. But those questions shattered the walls I had built over decades. And what lay beyond those walls was light. Meanwhile, Fari's life remained mostly unchanged. He still attended school, memorized more Qur'an, played football with friends, and helped his parents at home. But something had shifted. His teachers noticed a new respect in how his classmates spoke to him. He had become a quiet hero, not for winning a debate, but for staying kind in victory. At home, his father once asked him, Do you ever feel pressure, son? Fari shrugged. A little. But I don't carry the weight of people's expectations. I just try to do what pleases Allah. His father smiled. That's the secret to true leadership. Not wanting to be followed, but to follow truth. One Friday, during Jummah prayer, the mosque was packed. News had leaked that Vincent Gray, now known as Brother Abdullah, would be giving his first khutbah sermon. Some came out of curiosity. Others out of skepticism. But what they heard left everyone quiet. He began with the basmala, then paused. I used to think prayer was a waste of time. That faith was blind. That religion was outdated. He scanned the room slowly. But then a little boy showed me that true faith is clearer than logic, and far more healing than reason alone. I didn't convert because I lost an argument. I converted because I found peace. And I stand here today not to preach, but to apologize. You could hear a pin drop. I apologize for mocking what I didn't understand. For teaching others to doubt before I even tried to believe. And I thank Allah for giving me another chance. He closed his khutbah with tears in his eyes. If there is anyone here still unsure, still seeking, I beg you ask. Read. Listen. And most importantly, don't be too proud to feel. That evening, Fari's father came home with a surprise. Vincent has invited us for dinner, he said. Fari's eyes lit up. At Vincent's home, a modest meal was spread out, dates, roasted chicken, soup, and freshly baked bread. Nothing fancy, just sincerity in every bite. After dinner, Vincent handed Fari a small gift box. Inside it was a silver pen. "This belonged to my grandfather," Vincent said. "He was a writer. He believed words could change the world." "So do I," Fari replied. "Then it belongs to you now," Vincent said, smiling. "Because someday, the world will need to hear your words too." Later that night, as Fari lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mother came in and asked gently, "How do you feel, sweetheart?" He thought for a moment. "Grateful," he said softly. "Not because I won anything, but because Allah used someone small for something big." She kissed his forehead. "Sleep now, little teacher." Months passed, and with each passing week, the bond between Brother Vincent, now affectionately called Abdullah, and Fari deepened. They had become not just teacher and student, but mirrors to each other's hearts. What began as a confrontation in a crowded auditorium had evolved into something far greater, a lifelong friendship built on truth, transformation, and the quiet power of sincerity. But Allah's plans never end at one soul. The ripple effect continued. Elmore University, once a fortress of secular pride, had become a space of spiritual awakening. Debate clubs turned into reflection circles. Cafeterias echoed with students discussing Quranic verses next to Aristotle. Atheist students, once emboldened by Vincent's former teachings, now sat with Qur'ans open, asking questions they never dared ask before. One morning, as Fari entered the university courtyard with his father, he saw a group of students standing near the flagpole, crying. Curious, he approached. Among them stood a pale-faced professor. It was Dr. Salma, head of comparative religions. She knelt down beside Fari, tears in her eyes, and said, "He passed away peacefully, this morning. In sujud. At the masjid." Fari's knees weakened. His heart dropped. "Brother Vincent." She nodded. His face was glowing, they said. His lips were whispering Subhanallah when he returned to Allah. The university announced 3 days of mourning. In the prayer hall, rows of students lined up for his janazah. Professors who once debated him stood in silence. Journalists who had begged for interviews now held back tears. And Fari, he stood beside the body of the man who had once mocked him, now wrapped in a white shroud, returned to the one they both believed in. Fari whispered softly, "You kept your promise, sir. You said you wanted to return to Allah with peace. And you did." He placed a copy of the Qur'an next to the shroud. The very one he had given him months ago. "This book brought us together. May it carry you the rest of the way." Weeks later, a memorial lecture was organized at the university. Hundreds attended. It wasn't a formal event. No podium. No suits. Just a circle of people who had been touched by Vincent's journey. Fari was asked to speak last. He walked to the center, holding only a small note. "I am not a scholar," he began. "I'm only 7. I can't explain Greek philosophy or use big words. But I knew a man who could." The crowd smiled softly. "He was brilliant. Respected. Feared in debates. But he once told me that in front of truth, none of that mattered." Fari's voice trembled. "He said I was a mirror that reflected light into his darkness. But I want you to know, he became the mirror for many others." He looked around the circle. Brother Vincent didn't just become Muslim. He became a servant. He cleaned the mosque floors. He taught children. He gave charity. He made dua every night for his past students. A few sobs echoed in the room. He wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he died with La ilaha illallah on his lips. And if that's not a good ending, what is? Fari folded his note and stepped back. Time moved on. The world continued its noise, wars, politics, distractions. but the story of Vincent Gray and Fari remained etched in the hearts of those who heard it. A few years later, Fari was invited to speak at an international youth conference in Istanbul. He was now 10, more confident, still humble. As he stood before thousands, he was asked, "What's the greatest miracle you've seen?" Fari smiled. "Not parting the sea, not splitting the moon, but watching a man who used to insult God fall in love with him." Gasps and applause followed. He raised his hand gently. "But let me tell you something more important. The greatest miracle is not when others change. It's when you change." Vincent changed, but only because he listened. And the one who listens with humility will always be guided. He closed with a verse from the Qur'an. "Indeed, Allah guides whom He wills." Surah Al-Qasas, 56. Back at home, Fari often sat at the same bench where he and Vincent once talked. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with students who sought advice. Sometimes with elderly men who wanted to learn about faith again. They all called him the same name now. The little teacher. One evening, his father found him sitting there, gazing at the stars. "What are you thinking about, son?" Fari looked up and said, "I wonder if Brother Vincent can see us right now." His father smiled gently. "Maybe not. But if Allah is pleased with him, he's in a place where no pain reaches, where peace is permanent. Do you think he's proud of me?" Fari asked. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "He wouldn't be proud, Fari. He'd be grateful. Because you were the whisper that moved the mountain in his heart." Years later, a book was published titled, "The Whisper in the Mountain: How a Child's Logic Changed a Philosopher's Life." Written by one of Vincent's old colleagues, it documented the debate, the transformation, and the unseen spiritual battle that raged beneath every sentence exchanged between Fari and Vincent. In the dedication page it read, "To every child who thinks they are too small, and to every adult who thinks they are too wise, may truth find you where you least expect it." And in the final chapter, a quote from Fari. "Don't wait to become older, smarter, or louder to speak the truth. Just be sincere. Because Allah doesn't choose the loudest. He chooses the purest." The boy who had once walked onto a stage with a small mushaf and an innocent question had unknowingly sparked a revolution of the heart. And somewhere in the unseen, where angels record deeds and hearts are weighed by sincerity, a little boy and a once proud man had written a story together. Not with arguments, but with light.